So I apologize in advance for uh, the kind of awkward setup I've got here tonight. I know it makes for a video that's kind of hard to watch. But wanted to take a little bit of time to address these two main questions posed this week as to what caused political apathy in the Middle East under authoritarian rule for such a long period, and what can be seen as the originating factors and contributors to the recent shift towards political activism in the broader Middle East. I think a key point centers on this idea of how pervasive authoritarian regimes are in the region. There's a long historical precedent for them, and I think they've kind of enculturated this long seated sense that oppression and exploitation is the status quo. It's what's to be expected of your government, and that the citizenry is not a force in and of itself. It's to be subjugated to this great man, if you will. Um, and I think that's allowed totalitarian and authoritarian despots to rule with an iron fist for as long as they can hold power and retain it from the few challengers that dare uh, step forward. I think in our readings this week, Talby also talks about a few points that are key in that overall construct. That's human rights abuses. I think that is something that's been so pervasive that it kind of feeds into this submissive culture that kind of gives in to the status quo of really horribly exploitative leadership. Um, I think also the notion that they present on information censorship. There's no diversity of ideas and competition. Um, I think also the point that they bring out on corruption and the rule of law. In some cases, and honestly, in many cases in the region, corruption in a lot of senses it has really been the law historically. And that what I mean by that is corrupt rulers have been the beginning and the end of the legal system, and corruption just runs through and through. I think the other thing that we're looking at is what could have caused the change, the shift from that long period of apathy to what we're seeing more this past year, especially in the shift to political activism. And I think if we start with the example of Tunisia, there's a lot of factors that can be seen there. I think there's a confluence of socio-economic trends that um, really create the right environment for that to arise. And some of those can be seen in just burgeoning youth populations, rising education levels, largely among the youth, but the broader society as well. Um, I think that there's kind of a boiling point of mass discontent over the exploitation and the economic stagnation that's been um, kind of the norm for that region. Um, I think we also have to look at the role that pervasive diffusion of modern technology and excuse me, information availability across all tiers of the society has had. Um, I think. Sorry, I told you I have kind of a weird setup here. Um, and on the technology and information, I think there's two factors that really need to be considered there. One is that this exposed the society to a diversity of competing ideas, and also on the flip side, made them aware of how desperate they actually were for something more. Um, Beyond that, I think we have to look at how the technological infrastructure has provided capabilities to a discontented populace that didn't exist before. One example of that can be seen in Tunisia, how they used Twitter as a sort of command and control infrastructure. This is something that even a decade or several decades ago would have been unimaginable for this type of population. And it allowed them to stand toe to toe with a strong military regime and coordinate their efforts in a way that could be successful. I think also there's some merit to Victor Hugo once said that an invasion of armies can be resisted, but not so an idea whose time has come. And I think you have to look at the region as in the sense of how desperation and aspiration have really reached their breaking point. I think over time, as information has become more available, there has been a rising aspiration as to new forms of government they might be able to attain in their society. But a lot of the factors, such as, especially the exploitation and the really poor socioeconomic conditions in many of these countries, has enforced a sense of desperation in the population and the citizenry. And I think those two things coming together have really created the environment that makes it easier for this type of uprising and revolution in the region to take place. It seems like, along with them, this idea of popular sovereignty has really been given birth in the Middle East. Um, that the population, the demos, has the right to challenge the seat of power, which is something that hasn't been seen in really many cases in that region. Um, and then you also pose the question of whether political change has to be top down or bottom up. I think the answer is it can be either or both. Um, I think in most situations, more recent, we're really talking about a bottom up or uprising. I think that a lot of times it's arguable that that's more genuine and sustainable in many societies because the populace creates the economy, it creates social institutions, it is the driving force behind any nation state. And when they're in mass behind a certain political change, I think that's far more sustainable and enduring than something that's imposed or litigated from a top down authoritarian type model, although that latter model is certainly something that that has been seen and has been effective in some states. Um, anyway, I hope that was worthwhile, and I look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts this week.